Solving inequalities in one variable. So we're going to determine the x values that cause the polynomial function to be 0, positive, and negative. So they give us a function f of x plus 3 times x squared plus 6 times x minus 1. So first of all, I need to find the zeros. How would I go about finding zeros? Set it equal to 0 and solve. So I would get 5x plus 3 equals 0, x squared plus 6 equals 0, and x minus 1 equals 0.
Is there notes with this section?
No. So I would have x equals negative 3/5. This one would be x equals 1. What about this middle one? There should be stuff in college algebra that needs to be checked.
Plus or minus 6.
6
Maybe algebra 2, but I don't think so. What did we say?
6
Yep, plus or minus 6i. So are those real zeros? No, so I'm going to ignore those for the purpose of these problems. So what we do is we set up this little chart here, negative 3/5 and 1. And I'm going to figure out if the stuff is positive, negative, or 0. So obviously zeros, I already know, are at x equals negative 3/5 and x equals 1. And then I'm going to be finding the intervals where it's positive and the intervals where it is negative. So to do that, I pick a number that's in this interval and I plug it into the equation and I see what happens. So this is negative 3/5. I would recommend checking negative 1. So all I care about is each parentheses. So if I plug in negative 1 here, is this going to become positive or negative? It's negative. If I plug in negative 1 here, is this going to be positive or negative? Positive. If I plug in negative 1 here, is this going to be positive or negative? Negative. So negative times positive times negative is positive. So I know that's going to be a positive interval. What number can I pick in here? 0. So if I plug in 0, is this positive or negative? What about the next one? Positive. Last one. So when I multiply all that together, what is it? Negative. What number I put here? Can't be 1. I would choose a whole number. So yeah, I would choose 2. Plug in 2. Is this positive or negative? What about this one? Positive. And last one? Positive. So obviously that is positive. So when I write my intervals, and it will all be not including, this will be from negative infinity to negative 3/5, union 1 to infinity, and it's negative from negative 3/5 to 1. Number 6, f of x equals x plus 2 cubed, 4x squared plus 1, and x minus 9 to the 4th. Obviously, all that's being multiplied. So when I set this thing equal to 0, I'm going to get that x equals negative 2. Over here, what is this one? Well, if you are taking the square root, then it's going to be, if you're going to write it that way, then it's going to have to be plus or minus the square root of 1/4 and then times I outside if you're going to write it like that, which is fine. But either way, I can't use that one, so I put a line through it. And then x equals 9. So on my little chart, I've got negative 2, and I've got 9. So I already know zeros are at x equals negative 2 and x equals 9. And I want to find where it's positive and where it is negative. So what number should we choose here? Negative 3. When I put that in here, what's going to happen?
Negative?
Yep. Negative. And obviously we're cubing that value. What about when I plug in negative 3 here? Positive. And here?
Negative. Positive.
Positive. So if it's raised to an even power, I know that across the board that always is going to have to be positive. So if you want, you can go ahead and write in a positive in the third spot for every single one of them, because there's no choice but for it to be positive. All right, what number am I choosing here? 0. When I plug in 0, what is this?
Positive.
Positive. What about this one? Positive. And the last one we said is always positive. So this one comes out to be positive. Oh, I forgot to write this one over here. This one comes out to be negative. And what number am I choosing over here?
10.
So what is this?
Positive.
And the middle one?
Positive.
Positive. And the last one is also positive. So this whole thing is positive.
Wait, why is the x minus 9 like to the 4th? Why is that always positive?
Because it's raised to the 4th power. And anything raised to an even power is always positive. All right, so it is positive from negative 2 to 9, union 9 to infinity. And then it's negative from negative infinity to negative 2. All right, are there any questions on those ones that are equalities?
Is there anybody even at the door? I saw
saw
people
Ari.
walk by. But
I
it
saw
didn't look,
Ari.
it was Ari, but she
Well,
Ari
Ari
walked by after. Yeah.
All right, so these ones are equalities. Okay, the next ones are going to be inequalities. So we have in parentheses 2x plus 1 times x minus 2 times 3x minus 4 is less than or equal to 0. So the initial setup is the exact same every time. The difference in this one is I now have a less than or equal to. So the other ones wanted me to tell where the zeros were, where it was positive, and where it was negative. But if I want values that are less than or equal to 0, what does that mean I need to give? Values that are what? Negative or negative or 0. So that's the values that I am looking for when I give my interval at the end. So, what are my zeros? Yep. So those are the zeros. So I set up my sign chart. So negative 1/2, 4/3, and obviously make sure that they're in numerical order when you do it. You have a question? All right, what number am I picking over here? -1. Put in a negative, what do I get? Negative. What about here? This one? Negative, so this whole thing is negative. What number am I choosing in here? Yeah, 1 is fine or 0, either way. When I plug that in, what do I get? So that whole thing is positive. What number should I pick in here? Well, is 1 in this interval?
Wait, no. Can you please choose? Or you can't choose the number.
So sometimes it's unfortunate, but we have to choose a fraction. So what would be an easy fraction in here?
1 and 1/2.
Yeah, 1.5, whatever. Something in there would be easy to deal with. So when I plug that in, what do I get? What about here? Here? Should be positive. Okay, that is positive. And then over here, what number are we using?
3.
When I plug in 3, what do I get?
Positive. Positive. Positive.
So that one ends up being positive. This one here ended up being negative. All right, so the answer to these ones, we're not writing it out like we did up here where we had, here's the zeros, here's where it's positive, here's where it's negative. I need the values that make this a true statement. So I need the ones that are negative or 0. So that just means that instead of it being parentheses, some of them are going to be brackets because I'm including stuff. So it is negative from negative infinity to negative 1/2 because that's where it's 0. So I put a bracket. Union 4/3, that's a bracket because that's a 0, to 2, and another bracket because that's a 0. So this would be the solution to this one.
So why do you put brackets?
because we include 0. Or not include 0, but we include the zeros because it's less than or equal to. If it was just less than, it would all be parentheses. Let's see, number 10. 2x minus 7 times x squared minus 4x plus 4 is greater than 0. So what values do I need for this one when I get to my final answer, since this is greater than? Positives, not 0. Or not zeros, I guess I should say. All right, so is this factored all the way? Or can I take it farther?
You can't take it. No. Yes, you can.
What is it?
X minus 2 minus
Yep, so x minus 2 squared. So when I go to plug numbers in, I'm going to use this revised one here. So now where are my zeros?
X equals 7 over 2.
Yep, and
X equals 2.
all right, so put those on our number line. If you want to think about this as 3/2, just make it easier, you can. Or like, not 3/2, 3.5, you can. I'll write it both ways. All right, so what number should I plug in over here? That's fine. I use 0 personally, but if you want to use 1, that's fine. What do you get when you plug that in? Negative. What about this one? What's the power on here?
Oh. Positive.
So what's it always going to be? So I know that the second one is always going to be positive here because it is being squared. So no matter what's there, it's going to be positive. So this comes out to be negative. What number are we choosing in here?
3.
3. What do I get when I plug that in? Negative.
Positive.
So this one's also negative. And what number over here?
4.
What do I get when I do that? Positive, and the last one's always positive, so this is positive. So, since I don't want the zeros here, I'm going to have parentheses. I need the positive values, so I'm looking at 7/2, or you can write it as 3.5, or however you want to write it, to infinity. So that gives me the positive values, not zeros. All right, are there any questions on that before we get into the ones that are a little harder? All right, so same thing, except for now we're going to have rational equations. So I not only have to find zeros, but I also have to find where the function is undefined. Okay, so f of x equals 2x minus 7 times x plus 1 over x plus 5. So when I do these, I'm going to be ultimately finding zeros where it's undefined, where it's positive, and where it is negative. All right, so how do I find the zeros? Or what are the zeros?
You would solve for x. Like on each separate part.
But I have top and a bottom.
You can multiply the whole thing by 5 plus x.
I don't need to do that.
Just gave that a time.
Yeah, we just need to set the top equal to 0 to find the zeros. So what are the zeros for this one?
7 over 2.
And
-1.
yep, so the zeros are at -1 and 7/2. Where would this function be undefined? Or how would I find when it's undefined? Yep, when the bottom's equal to 0.
Like at negative.
So at x equals -5. So the difference in these ones compared to the other ones is that when I set up my sign chart, I also have to include the undefined ones. Okay? But I can't include those values when I'm finding where it's positive and negative and all of that, obviously. If, like, I'm more so saying that for when we get to the inequality ones that look like this. But just to give you a little preview. So I'm at -5, and a lot of times the ones that are like undefined, when I do it, I'll actually put like a little like line through them so that I remember like I can't include that one. And again, not as relevant with this problem, but when we get to the inequalities it will be. And then -1 and 7/2. So these sign charts are going to look a little different because they're now fractions. So I'll have the two things on top and the one on the bottom. All right, so what number am I choosing over here? -6, and what happens when I plug that in?
Negative. Or no, positive. Yeah,
Negative. So that whole thing is negative. What about in here? -2, and what do I get? Negative. Negative and positive, so this whole thing is positive. What about in here? What do I get? So this whole thing is negative. What about over here? 4. When I plug that in, I get so that whole thing is positive. So then now, doing my intervals, it is positive from -5 to -1, union 7/2 to infinity. And it's negative from -infinity to -5, union -1 to 7/2. Alright, let's do this. Let's stop there for today and we'll save the inequality ones like this for Monday and wrap up the section then. But your problems to where we are right now are 3, 9, 11 and 25. Yeah, that's it for now. So do those 3 today, and then I'll add a few more on Monday when we do the inequality ones that look like this. But I want to make sure that we know what we're doing on those before we keep going.